أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد. Verse number 42 اركض برجلك هذا مغتسل بارد وشراب ووهبنا له أهله ومثلهم معهم رحمة منا وذكرى لأولي الألباب. We told him, stamp your foot on the ground. This ensuing spring is a cooling bath and drink. And we gave back his family to him, along with others like them, as a mercy from us and an admonishment for those who possess intellect. Continuing with our story about Ayyub alayhi salam, we discussed different aspects of the verse إِذْ نَادَى رَبَّهُ أَنِّي مَسَّنِيَ الشَّيْطَانُ بِنُصْبٍ وَعَذَابٍ, which of course had different theological issues attached to it. Now, of course, the story runs as after Ayyub made that dua and Allah responded, then a miracle took place. Allah wanted to cure the disease which was with Ayyub alayhi salam with a type of magical water that sprang in that cave or the area in which Ayyub was living for a long time in isolation. And of course the verse is very concise, and the whole story, if you just look at these verses, the whole story is told in 4 verses, and it gives the gist of what had happened, and of course it relies on the knowledge of the readers from outside to analyze the verses given here, and it judges about what had happened, of course. Now, what was told to Ayyub after Allah decided to change everything for him? As Ayyub could not move at all, and he could not get any cure from anywhere, so Allah told him, stamp your foot on the ground. And then a spring flew with a water for cure of his body and for cure of internal diseases that he had. So the verse says, stamp your foot on the ground, and this spring is a cooling bath and drink. And as we have in different accounts of this story, he took a bath in that spring, and all disease that he had on his body was cured, and he drank from it, and all internal diseases was cured. Just in a matter of seconds, he was completely back as his previous status. And we are told that when his wife came back, she could not recognize him because he was now completely a different man. And of course, he told him of the good news of Allah, giving him this shafa, responding to his dua, and bringing back the ni'mah that he had before. And we gave, now apart from that, we gave back to him his family. His family, of course, were lost, as the story told us, due to different causes, natural causes. He had lost his wealth, he had lost his family. And the verse says, وَوَهَبْنَا لَهُ أَهْلَهُ, we gave back his family to him, وَمِثْلَهُمْ مَعَهُمْ, along with others like them. Now there is a question here, and that is, did Allah give exactly the same children who were lost, or he gave to him other children in the course of time, in the course of future time? وَوَهَبْنَا لَهُ أَهْلَهُ وَمِثْلَهُمْ مَعَهُمْ, and of course the same number we added to it. So if he had 10 children, we gave him 20 children. If Allah wants to give him back 10 children, in the course of time, it would have taken at least another 10 years for his family to come back to him. And then the same number given to him again. That would be about 20 years. And we know Ayub, when this misfortune afflicted him, was almost an old man. He was about 70, 80 years old when this misfortune afflicted him. And therefore, it would be not very probable to think that Allah waited so that new children were born for him, and then he mentions we gave him his people or his family back to him. And that is not giving the family back, actually. It is replacing them with some other children. What would be understood from the verse is that the same children who were lost, the same family members who Ayub loved and he had lost, came back to him. And this would be another miracle, of course, that Ayub increased his status among Banu Israel by actually being given that miracle, his children coming back to life. He was given something as a status which was not perceivable for anyone else. In a way, as he had lost all his credits with the people, and they thought that he had been afflicted because of a grave sin that he had committed towards Allah. Now this miracle had changed everything. Not only he was given his health, not only he was given back his family, now an increased type of status and position and respect among the people of his town he was given. Now, if we go for this alternative of tafsir of the verse, not return of the family not in a natural way, but return of the family in a supernatural way. Those people who were lost to Ayub, those family members, were given back to him. They came back to life. If this is the case, and this is of course what is understood from the verse and from the stories which are told, then a very interesting question raises here. Would people come back to life after death? In this number, of course, we know that people have come back to life after death. And Quran mentions that. Like, for example, Isa alayhi salam giving life to the dead. وَأُحْيَ الْمَوْتَى بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ, I give life to the dead with the permission of God. So this is possible. And when we say that when a soul leaves this world, they wouldn't come back at all, there should be some exceptions there in very extraordinary cases. And here is one of those cases in which, say for example, if he had 10 children and they were all lost, Allah brought all of them back to life. And that would not be immediately, as it was in the case of Isa alayhi salam, when, for example, people who had died for 3 days or 1 day, Jesus brought them back to life. This was after 7 years, apparently, after the bodies of those children were somehow dismembered, and in a way it was a sign for the resurrection as well, that Allah gave to people who were living in the town with Ayub. It was a blessing, of course. If this was the case and this had happened, it was a blessing that Allah gave life to his children, showing to the people the way the resurrection would happen. Now, this, of course, this is one of the verses which is mentioned in the reports about Raj'ah. And that is, of course, another very controversial story. You know that there is this big controversy among Shia and Sunni ulama about the Raj'ah. Would it be possible that Allah will bring some people back before the Day of Judgment to life, or it would not be possible? You know, the overwhelming view of Shia ulama is that before the Day of Judgment, something very peculiar and very strange would happen. And that would be the return of a group of people, a group of companions of the Prophet, and those who came after them, they will come back to life. And of course, a group of Ahlul Bayt will come back to life. And then there will be a judgment on this earth. And then after that, the day of judgment will come, the blowing of the trumpet will happen, and blowing of the trumpet will not happen before that raj'ah, before that coming back. I do not remember if I have discussed raj'ah in full here in Mahfil Ali at all or not. If we have not discussed it, we may put that as the discussion of our next session, because that's completely related to the verse. If we have, I just skip it and we go. I don't know. We haven't. Okay, so inshallah, because that's a very controversial issue. And that's one of the issues that Shias are always reprimanded for, that you believe in a funny thing, and that is raj'ah, and coming back of people who have died several centuries, coming back to life. For what reason? Why should they come back? And what's the reason of that judgment on the earth before the day of judgment? So we will discuss that, inshallah, next week, because that would need a detailed type of treatment. However, what I wanted to mention here is that the verse is one of those verses mentioned by scholars as a proof of possibility of raj'ah, of people who are dead coming back to life. And of course, there are other verses in the Quran talking about people coming in huge numbers back to life after they died. أَلَمْ تَرَ إِلَى الَّذِينَ خَرَجُوا مِنْ دِيَارِهِمْ in Surah Baqarah وَهُمْ أُلُوفٌ حَذَرَ الْمَوْتِ. Have you not seen those who, out of fear of death, they all migrated from their city, and they were thousands. وَهُمْ أُلُوفٌ حَذَرَ الْمَوْتِ فَقَالَ لَهُمُ اللَّهُ مُوتُوا ثُمَّ أَحْيَاهُم. Allah told them, die, because they were doing a wrong thing. Of course, the story is very detailed. It's a very detailed story. And then Allah, as a blessing, brought them back to life to show them something, to show them His signs. So coming back to life in huge numbers is something which is mentioned in the Quran as well. But coming back in huge numbers after several centuries for something which is going to happen anyhow on the day of judgment, for a judgment, for a type of settlement of the quarrels, is something which is seen to be quite improbable by many scholars. And of course, I don't think among Shia scholars anyone would argue against the issue of raj'ah. Anyhow, if this is the case, if Ayub was given his children back, then of course there is this miraculous type of blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on Ayub alayhi salam, giving back his family who were lost, who had passed away. As we understand from the verse, the clear meaning of the verse would tell us that this is the case. His lost family members were given back to him. وَوَهَبْنَا لَهُ أَهْلَهُ وَمِثْلَهُمْ مَعَهُمْ, along with others like them. It means in number, like them in number. So not exactly the similar people, the same people copied again for them. وَمِثْلَهُمْ مَعَهُمْ means the same in number. We gave back to him رَحْمَةً مِنَّا, as a mercy from us, for a servant, for a slave of us, who was so patient and so thankful to all our bounties. وَذِكْرَى لِأُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ, and an admonition for those who possess intellect. It means, if you really ponder in this story, and you are from those who possess intellect, you believe in this story, first of all, and then you ponder in it, and you are from those who possess intellect, you will take lots of lessons from this story. Now, in Surah, there's one issue which is related to this I want to mention. In Surah Anbiya, the same story is mentioned, and the same verse with very, very slight difference is mentioned there. وَوَهَبْنَا لَهُ أَهْلَهُ وَمِثْلَهُمْ مَعَهُمْ رَحْمَةً مِنْ عِنْدِنَا. Of course, here it says رَحْمَةً مِنَّا. In Surah Anbiya it says رَحْمَةً مِنْ عِنْدِنَا, which is the same thing. Of course, مِنْ عِنْدِنَا, usually the exegetes say when Allah says endi or endina, this is a technical term, means it comes from alamul am, from somewhere which is related to the world of God rather than to your world. And it is clear, of course, the rahmah which came to Ayyub alayhi salam, it was not from through a natural channel. It was not from the worldly type of mercy that Allah gives to people. It was rahmatan min andihi, something which belonged to his type of realm, and that is coming extraordinarily, immediately, something which was with the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a supernatural way. However, there it says وَذِكْرَى لِلْعَابِدِينَ. Of course, here it says وَذِكْرَى لِأُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ, a reminder for those who possess intellect. And in Surah Anbiya it says, and a reminder for those who worship. ذِكْرَى لِلْعَابِدِينَ. Now, when we come across such verses, I mean, you might have seen very similar instances of these verses in the Quran. When we come across such verses, do we give a correlation between these attributes? For example, are abidin the same as ulul albab? Because there it says وَذِكْرَى لِلْعَابِدِينَ, it's a reminder for those who worship. And here is, of course, worship, it means the real meaning of worship. Those who really worship me would take heed of this instance and this example. Here it says ذِكْرَى لِأُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ, a reminder for those who possess intellect. And could we say that those who possess intellect are exactly those who worship? And vice versa, those who worship are exactly those who possess intellect. We can say that because this is a correlation made here. If the reminder is something that ulul albab would have, and something that abidin would have, then it would mean that abidin are actually ulul albab. The real people of intellect, those who really possess intellect are those who really worship God. And if someone somehow puts in less effort in worship, it means that there is something wrong with their intellect. And that, of course, the intellect which is defined by the Prophet, by the Quran, and by A'imma alayhimus salam, al-aqlu ma ubida bihar rahman. Intellect is that faculty of human being, that faculty in human being that would make them to worship God. And this is something, of course, that we understand ourselves. That, yes, what is that faculty in us that urges us to worship God? Now, of course, the atheists and those who do not believe in God, they say it's ignorance. It's ignorance that urges you to worship God. However, of course, it's ignorance that they are saying such a thing. Because if we really think that there is someone who has created us, and there is that creator is the final goal of every human being, going close to him, coming closer to him. He is the source of everything. He is the source of power, the source of beauty, the source of everything that human being would aspire for. Then, of course, the intellect tells us that, okay, why don't you go towards him? And, of course, the way towards him is worshipping. And therefore, intellect would tell human being to worship him. There's a very beautiful story of Ibn Abil Awja' with Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salam. Ibn Abil Awja', along with some other intellectuals of his time, were actually the atheists of that era. And of course they were very clever, very shrewd. They never in public said something that would somehow urge the authorities to rule that they are murtad and they have to kill them. No. But in private sessions, especially when they came to Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, They had very, very frank arguments with him about God. We do not believe in whatever Muhammad has brought, and these are all ignorance of the past people. And of course, it's very beautiful when we see when Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq actually replied to them, especially to Ibn Abil Awja. Now, in one story, there are many, many stories about this and many reports about the discussions going between them. In one story, once Ibn Abil Awja came to a session of Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, who was with some of his students, and he said, "What is your proof for God, that God exists?" And Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salam told him, "Are you created or you are not created?" He said, "I'm not created. I'm just come about myself." Just as, for example, people who believe in evolution nowadays. Of course, these ideas have been there right from the beginning of human history. You shouldn't think that since we are living in a modern era and after Enlightenment, now people think like this. No, since the very, very beginning of since the dawn of human race and human history, people were thinking like that. Even at the time of Nuh, you read in the Quran, at the time of Nuh, when he talked about God and he talked about the hereafter, they said, "Hada asatirul awwalin." These are myths of the old people who didn't know anything. We do not believe in any of these things. Now, Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq said, "Are you created or you are not created?" He said, "I'm not created. I've just come about myself." Then Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq asked him, "How you would have been if you were created?" I mean, if someone wanted to create you, if there was an intelligent being who wanted to create you, how would he had created you? He thought a little bit. Would it been any different? And if, for example, there was a God and he wanted to create us, would there be anything more than what we are at the moment? I mean, if someone ponders, and it is said that at that meeting, Ibn Abil Awja thought for a while and then he just left because he couldn't find any answer. There wouldn't have been any difference if he was created, actually, because the creation of the way the human being is at the moment is so wise and so intelligent that, of course, no one can say something better would have happened for a human being if there was a creator. Now, if we have that intellect which connects us to a type of understanding which urges people to think about where they have come from, where they are living in, and where they are going to go, then, of course, those people would have become real worshippers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, ulul albab, if we compare the verses of the Quran, just a type of method of inferring meanings, deducing meanings from different verses of the Quran. As here it says dhikra li ulul albab, there it says dhikra lil abidin. We could actually make a correlation between abidin and ulul albab, and then if we analyze it, we would see that yes, ulul albab are abidin and abidin are ulul albab. Of course, not every abid is ulul albab. Those who really worship God, those who worship with understanding, then they are ulul albab. Now, another thing mentioned in this verse, وَخُذْ بِيَدِكَ ضِغْثًا فَاضْرِبْ بِهِ وَلَا تَحْنَثْ إِنَّا وَجَدْنَاهُ صَابِرًا نِعْمَ الْعَبْدُ إِنَّهُ أَوَّابٌ. We told him, take a faggot in your hand and then strike your wife with it, but do not break your oath. Indeed, we find him to be patient. What an excellent servant indeed he was, a penitent soul. إِنَّهُ أَوَّابٌ. Now, apparently something else had happened while Ayub was in his hardship. And that was an incident brought about by his wife. Now, the incident is mentioned in different ways in the stories. It was something which made Ayub to make a pledge, to take an oath in the name of God, that he would flog his wife with 100 lashes. Something that, the type of thing that Ayub thought his wife had committed would have brought that type of punishment. And of course, Allah says that you have made an oath, you have to fulfill it. But in a way, the verse is exonerating his wife, saying that your wife was innocent. But you are a prophet, you have made an oath, you cannot break your oath. So a measure is somehow given to him by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to both fulfill the oath and also not to harm his wife. Now, what his wife had done, of course, is not very clear in the stories which are given around this verse. And none of the stories would actually fulfill the requirements of a lady being flogged by a prophet. Of course, here he is not seen as her husband, he is seen as a prophet trying to punish something which is punishable. Now, one riwayah says that he, of course, had taken oath that if he is cured and he finds the power, apparently he had no power whatsoever, he couldn't even take a stalk of a plant or anything to punish his wife, but he swore, he had an oath that if I am cured and I regain my power, I will flog you. Now, Ibn Abbas reports that the reason for that was that Iblis came to his wife in the form of a doctor and told her that I am capable, I have the knowledge to cure your husband. And I don't want any money, because Ayyub's wife said, we don't have any money to give you. They were just living on the dust. They couldn't pay. The doctor, who was Iblis, told her, I don't want any money. I don't want any remuneration from you. The only thing I want is that when I cure Ayyub, he thanks me. And of course she said, of course he would thank you. He said, okay, but this is a special thank I want. He should confess, or he should concede that I have cured him. This is not related to God. I do not believe in God or anything. This is just my knowledge. He should confess or concede that I have cured him. And this was, of course, the ploy of the shaitan, according to this story, to somehow distract the attention of Ayyub from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because in all those days of hardship, Ayyub never ever diverted his attention from his Lord, never lost his patience, never ceased to thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he said, this is my condition. And of course, Ayyub's wife said, okay, I will speak to him. And he came and spoke to Ayyub and said, there is a doctor, he can cure you, and the only thing is that you should thank him and say that, thank you for curing me. That's all. That's all. And you should concede that he has cured you. And in this, upon this statement, Ayyub became very, very angry, because, of course, Ayyub sensed where this has come from, and sensed that where is the door to fitna and to disbelief, and therefore he said that I swear by God I will flog you if I get cured, because of what you have said and what you have agreed with that doctor, whom we don't know who that doctor is. Now, this is the story given by Ibn Abbas about the issue, and of course there are many, many other reports who tell us the same story. Something which was to somehow
insinuate to Ayub through his wife that God has forsaken you, now turn to others. And that doctor, of course, came and said, turn to me, I will cure you. And this was, of course, another test for Ayub, another test for his wife. Now, but why, of course, Allah exonerates his wife and saying that just take a stock of 100, a batch of 100 stocks and give one single hit to your wife so that your oath is fulfilled and she is not hurt, is because, of course, his wife did not realize the ploy of shaitan. And she just wanted to help. She just wanted to help Ayub in that. But Ayub realized that, and in that, by that oath, he showed to his wife that how grave was the mistake and how difficult it was if they were cheated by shaitan. The other reports which have come in Tafseer al-Qummi and some other Sunni Tafasir is that his wife had very nice hair, and it was a shame on ladies to cut their hairs. And when she was going and asking for food from people in the city, in the town, of course they usually either they gave them or she worked for them. One of them once told her that we are not going to give you any food anymore unless you sell your hairs to us. And she agreed. She sold her hair, and therefore when she came back to Ayub, Ayub saw that her hair was cut, and she became very angry because that was a sign of disgrace. That was something which was very, very shameful in that custom for the ladies to do. And in a way, ladies with disgrace were given the punishment of their hair being cut. And since, of course, they were very, very desperate, and Ayub's wife wanted to help and wanted to bring some food for her husband, she did that. But Ayub said, no, I would not. I did not want that food with such a disgrace, and therefore he swore by God that he is going to flog her after he gets his power back. Now, what the verse says is that, and take a faggot in your hand with 100 stalks of weak stalks, for example, or weeds or something like that, and then strike your wife with it, because I don't want you to renege in your oath. You have to fulfill your oath, and your wife shouldn't be punished for something that she has not done actually, or she is not responsible for it, not held something that is not punishable. But do not break your oath. So do take this measure and do not break your oath. And then, of course, there is a commendation of Ayub's attitude. Inna wajadnahu sabiran. Indeed, we found him to be patient. What an excellent abd. I wonder how we can really translate abd into English. Sometimes we translate it as a slave, sometimes we translate it as servant, but I don't think any of these would give the meaning of abd with relation to human beings and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Someone who completely belongs to someone else. This is the meaning of abd. And who is completely looked after by someone else. And anyhow, here, servant or slave, innahu awwab. Indeed, he was a penitent. Now, one other issue I just want to mention, and then we finish, and that is how the Prophet, peace be on him, and Aimma alayhimus salam, they sometimes deduced rulings, inferred rulings from verses of the Quran. And they actually, in different occasions, in extraordinary occasions, they resorted to some verses of the Quran to bring new rulings and to give new types of practice. In Majma' al-Bayan, he reports from someone called Abbad al-Makki, and this was one of the companions of Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salam. He says that's one once Sufyan al-Thawri told me. Sufyan al-Thawri was one of the famous mystics of that era, and he had some, of course, relations with Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, but he did not have that sort of close tie with him to ask him questions as he has put here to Abbad al-Makki. Sufyan al-Thawri says that once I asked Abbad al-Makki, Abbad al-Makki says Sufyan al-Thawri told me that I see that you have very good relations with Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salam, so go and ask him one question, and I want the answer to brought back for me. And he said the question is, a man has committed adultery, not adultery, fornication. A man has committed fornication, and he is ill in a way that if we flog him with 100 lashes, he would die. And of course, the punishment for fornication is not death, is 100 lashes. So, if the had is established, and if he is punished by the had, which is 100 lashes, he would die. So what should we do in this case? Now, this Abbad al-Makki came to Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq and he put the question. Imam said that's, well, of course, Imam knew the level of Abbad al-Makki. He said, this is not your question. Who has asked you to ask me the question? And he said that Sufyan al-Thawri has asked me. And Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq said, we have an instance of this at the time of the Prophet, peace be on him. Because at his time, فقال إن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله أتي برجل أحبن. Ahban is someone who had a disease in his stomach, and the stomach swells up, and there is a type of like مرض الاستسقاء, something like that. قد استسقى بطنه. It means that he was drinking lots and lots of water, and the stomach had swelled, and of course, if 100 lashes were given to him, he would have died. وَقَدْ زَنَى بِامْرَأَةٍ مَرِيضَةٍ. And he had committed fornication with an ill woman. Apparently, they were in a hospital-like place or something like that. And then the Prophet ordered that the same thing that was done here, mentioned in this verse, that a batch of 100 stalks is taken, and they were hit once with it. فَضَرَبَهُ بِهِ ضَرْبَةً وَضَرَبَهَا بِهِ ضَرْبَةً. One hit to the man, one hit to the woman. And then he says, this is of course understood from the verse, وَخُذْ بِيَدِكَ ضِغَثًا فَضْرِبْ بِهِ وَلَا تَحْنَثْ. And as the verse mentions, take one batch of stalks and hit. And this, of course, the hadith is not very significant in the sense that it's a story of an incident at the time of the Prophet. But it gives us a very significant concept, and that is the A'imma alayhimus salam and the Prophet. They were using different verses of the Quran for the rulings of Sharia, which usually we do not understand. We do not take the technicalities of the detailed technicalities that sometimes are mentioned in some verses, and they are hidden and concealed from us. And this is why Ayyimah alayhi salam said in many occasions that whatever we rule and we say, it is either from the Prophet or we have inferred it from the Quran. And sometimes they mention things that we never see that in the Quran. We never see a verse like that in the Quran. But of course, that's a type of inference that, for example, someone takes from this verse, that if Ayub did this and this was possible and permissible, then there is a possibility that in some occasions, in some very strange cases, we could use this type of inference and ruling. Inshallah, next week we will discuss about Raj'a in more details. Wa sallallahu ala Muhammadin wa alihi tahirin.
Okay, brothers and sisters, any questions? Or comments and sisters, brothers? Sheikh, when we look at these two stories that have been related, for example, in context of Prophet Ayyub, about one about shaitan coming in the form of a doctor, and the other that his wife going to people for begging or working and then being asked to give her hair away. These are completely two different kind of extremes of stories. Now, how could this arise? I mean, one can understand, for example, if shaitan comes as a doctor, then we can have slight variations in the details. But these are two extreme stories. I mean, doesn't...
Now, of course, when in many of these traditions, which are not, of course, scarce in number, when we say, for example, Iblis came in form of a doctor or Iblis came in form of such and such, it doesn't mean that really Iblis changed form and came like that. It means that Iblis went to a doctor or Iblis went to such and such person and whispered to him. And therefore that man became an agent of Iblis and came to these people. And when we read the stories like this in ahadith, which, as I said, are very frequently seen in ahadith, we have to probably take it like this, that not Iblis coming in form of these people, but people are actually being possessed by Iblis in a way. And they say the things that Iblis wants to say. However, the discrepancy in the explanation, of course, this is something that we have in all the stories. Why this happened? Because, of course, some people say this, some people say that. And Quran has just left it without any explanation because apparently it was not important at all why this happened. The important thing was that, of course, Allah showed to Ayyub a way to somehow fulfill his oath without hurting someone. So this is the important thing that Quran wants to mention.
Yeah, just a minute. If I can just, if you don't mind. I can understand, okay, Iblis doesn't come in the form of a doctor. He must have inspired somebody. But then, this, looking at the two stories, two versions, how do human beings then actually function as to why should human being want to say relate, cook up a completely different sort of kind of a story saying that this is what happened and or this is what happened. I mean, one can understand, okay, when I said that the sheikh went from here to his house either by car or by train or by bus, there is a variations, but there is some connection that you went from here to your home, but then different version. But this is a completely different thing. There's a cure for you by some other person coming in the form of a shaitan, and also his wife being sort of put into a situation where she had to sell her hair away, completely different versions. Why should human beings want to cook up something like that?
Well, I don't know. This is what has happened. So.
Assalamu alaikum. May I mention just a point, please? Sounds like Christian, so they're trying to sort of put the fault on a woman again. You went sold your hair, or you just been influenced by shaitan. Simply, I just read, I don't know where, but the reason that Ayyub alayhi salam wanted to hit her is just simply she complained. She was tired of this tribulation. That was the only reason. The other story could not be relevant.
Yes, this...
Sorry, I just want to mention that a mu'mina, she was a mu'mina. She was in a high position. She wasn't an ordinary woman. So a woman in that state would not make such extreme mistake. It just, she got tired out of innocently being a human being and complained, and Ayyub alayhi salam did not accept that complaint.
Yes, that is what is mentioned as well, not reported, mentioned as well. But then in this case, the point is that if we go for this, this version or this explanation, then we have brought a sin on Ayub, because it is not fair that just because of complaining, Ayub would take an oath that I would flog you. So there should have been something, because, I mean, it's a very sensitive issue. We have two sides here. We have Prophet Ayub with that huge patience and that type of character that Allah mentions, and we have his wife, who was an ordinary woman, of course. Then we either can say, yes, she complained, but Ayub was such a rough person, or such a tough person who did not consider situations. He just said, I would flog you because you just have complained. Or we go to these versions of the story. So any version we choose, I mean, any side we take, there are some problems there. So, of course, we don't want to put blame and problem on Ayub because he was a prophet. Not because he was a man, of course, because he was a prophet. And so we have to see what was wrong on the other side, that he had to take that oath.
Yes, Mikdad.
Assalamu alaikum. Just continuing on that, what it seems is that you said that Prophet Ayyub's wife didn't think she was doing something wrong, but did it. And so Ayyub knew what the actual action was, and because of that action, he agreed. He decided to make the judgment, not as a husband, but as a judge, to do these 100 lashes. So if he's made a judgment, then he must. I mean, if Allah is saying no, you shouldn't make this judgment, because actually her intention was not to do that, then has he made a mistake in that sense?
He made a judgment, and the judgment was not a mistake, but the punishment was severe for that situation. And therefore Allah, the point is that Ayub didn't want anything would somehow make him swerve from what he was tolerating and bearing in the way of patience and for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Anything coming, suggesting something different would have made him very angry, of course. And Allah, in a way, wants to say us that this is a harsh punishment for that. And you take this punishment instead of that one.
Isn't that basically saying that his personal situation influenced his judgment? His personal background, that he didn't want something to happen to him, influenced what a judgment ruling, which is completely independent of that. I mean, a ruling should not be based on the fact that I am feeling ill at the moment, therefore I'm going to hurt you harder. I mean, isn't it supposed to be a ruling is a ruling?
No, sometimes you see different situations require different rulings. I mean, if, for example, in a society we have insecurity, we might think of very harsh measures to establish security, which, of course, in an ordinary way, we don't take those measures. Here, of course, Ayub was in a position that there was always this possibility that something comes and insinuates that you have to stop putting your reliance on God, do something about it, God has forsaken you. So that's why he was so harsh in his type of judgment and the punishment that he saw for such a type of suggestion. In an ordinary situation, yes, certainly he wouldn't have thought of that type of punishment. But in that situation, we do not attribute it to his anger, actually, or to his illness, but to the type of situation in which he was, which required that type of tough and hard type of measures that he should have thought of about anyone or anything coming and suggesting that you have to desist from this patience.
Are you okay? Yep. To some extent. Sisters, yeah.
Could we just look at it in another way, that Prophet do make a mistake and Allah will correct them? Like Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the ayah says, "Awasa wa ta'ala." Why did you pull, your face? this is, you know, the certain mistake they make on their own position and Allah will correct them. Or you could say that Ayyub alayhi salam, from the fear of Allah, had so much fear, khawf from him, when his wife said that, complained, and he says, well, why Allah will punish you? It couldn't be a fault of him, but it could be the fear. Then
Yeah.
Allah cleared that, you know, this is a severe punishment. I would not put it upon my slave.
So you are not suggesting that it was a mistake of Ayub. We suggest that it was something done out of fear of God.
Yeah, could be.
So there are
Or
now
most probably.
two different issues. If Ayub did that out of fear, and the reason was the complaint, now that's another third version of the story that, I mean, could be equally seen along with other versions. However, if we go for the mistakes, then of course that's a very, very controversial issue, as you know, among Shias and Sunnis, because Shias believe that prophets do not make mistakes in such issues. But the Sunni scholars, of course, allow mistakes to this extent, and then there is a controversy about that verse, Abasa wa Tawalla, as you know, among Shia and Sunni ulama. Again, coming back to this issue of the prophets making mistakes or doing saghira sins and something like that. But if we don't take this into that context and see that Ayub made that type of decision because of fear of Allah, and the reason was not the other two type of decisions made by his wife, but the complaint, that's right. Yes, we can go for that option as well. Yes.
We come to Zuhair and then to Sarfraz.
You were suggesting that because of the two verses you would correlate Ulul Albab with the Abidin, and to suggest that intellectuals would automatically be Abidin. But then we have a hadith to say that 1 hour of intellectual or gaining knowledge is better than 70 years of worshipping. How would you then correlate to that with this?
No, as I said, worship has different levels and different. Our understanding from worship should be somehow categorization of types of worship. I mean, we have to think that yes, there are different categories of worship. Not every worshipper is ulul albab, and the verses coming, the ahadith coming in that vein that of course ilm is better than ibadah, alim is better than abid. It means those abidun who worship not with knowledge and not with understanding. However, the other side would be everyone who is ulul albab would be an abid, would worship God in their own ways, of course, not somehow spending all their time in ibadah, but they do worship God in the real sense. So every ulul albab, everyone who's ulul albab is an abid. But the other side is not right, that everyone who's an abid is an ulul albab. So yes, for those abidun who are not ulul albab, learning knowledge and gaining and using their intellect more is better than just spending their time in ibadah. However, ulul albab, automatically they are from abidun. They use their intellect in worshipping God.
Satisfied? Yeah. Sarfraz, and then we go back to the sisters.
Assalamu alaikum. Sheikh, it's perfectly understandable, I think, from our point of view, for a husband or a wife to compromise some things for the sake of the well-being of the other person. But in this case, Nabi Ayyub's wife actually told Shaitan in the first version of the story that my husband will thank you. And she had no right to compromise not her husband, but the office of prophethood. And I think that was probably the thing that upset him. Not that I have to, but the office of prophethood is compromised, and this is something very grave.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, if we're hypothetically trying to analyze who has the blame and which, clearly in the Quran, Allah is not blaming Ayyub and he is blaming his wife. And so just from his point of view, we have to accept one and not the other.
Yes, of course, the blame goes for the wife, but of course it might be out of complaint, which was mentioned. It might be out of that compromise that she thought Ayub will make with Shaitan, or for the other issue. But Ayub is not somehow blamed for his decision. But somehow there are some sort of alleviating measures here for the wife because, of course, she was in that situation.
But the point is that we can't put any blame on Ayub, because if he had done anything which was unjust or insincere or anything that was not correct from our point of view, then Allah would know better, and He has no hesitation in blaming Nabi Adam when it's necessary.
Yeah,
He would certainly
true.
have no hesitation here if it was necessary in any way.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, in fact, Allah is very quick to blame His prophets if they somehow, not mistakes and sins in the way we do, but in their thought, something coming to their thought, Allah is very quick to blame, yes. True.
Yes, sisters, yes. Can you please... Can you please use the mic?
Can you use the mic, please? Sorry.
Maybe he's setting that example. So if anybody wants to refer it and how harsh he was, then they know that he did something. He didn't leave her alone or whatever. To set an example.
To set an example for people
For
in the
other people to
future,
refer to his.
to refer to His judgment. Yes, of course, everything that prophets do would set an example. And in a way, even what Allah has mentioned here as those softening measures, which softens the punishment or somehow takes away the severity of the punishment, is practiced by the Prophet, peace be on him, as well. So he has set an example here, which is used by the Prophet. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, Muhammad?
Assalamu alaikum. Sheikh, a couple of weeks ago we discussed the illness of Prophet Ayub and the fact that it was not a disease which would have affected his prophethood, as in people actually going to see him, or would you classify the fact that he was bedridden for a number of years and not actually going out to propagate, would that have affected his prophethood on this illness he had?
In what way? Only in preaching, you mean?
Yes, and yeah.
Well, of course, it had affected in a way, but it did not. Divest him of his prophethood. It's just like, for example, if a prophet is put in prison, it wouldn't divest him of his prophethood, but he cannot go and preach. Here, it is the same thing, as if Ayub was put in that prison of the cave, and he could not move. It was a fault of people not going to him, thinking that this is an affliction coming to him because of a sin and they have to avoid him and something like that. Otherwise, no, he was prophet still.
Sisters, before I come back to Zuhair here, any sisters? No, Zuhair?
I'm sorry. The thing you mentioned at the beginning about children and the like of them, etc. I mean, there's nothing in the Quran about it, and it seems to be that muhaddithin are making mountains out of molehills to say he was 70 and he had 10 children and he had another 10 children after that. I mean, is there any foundation on all this?
No, there is nothing of this sort mentioned in the Quran, but what we understand, وَوَهَبْنَا لَهُ أَهْلَهُ, means we gave him the same children that he had. This is what we understand from the verse. I mean, the straightforward explanation is that, yeah, the same children that he had, we gave them back to him. But how many they were, how old Ayub was, and these things, these we get it from riwayat, of course. But it doesn't change our understanding of the verse, that even if he had one or two children, those children were given back to him after they had passed away. And this brings that question of Raj'a forth.
You talk in terms of Raj'a, you're saying 7 years. I mean, if you were 70, 77, I mean, why does it imply that the children were dead? I mean, this is just, seems to be, everything is just made out of nothing, it seems.
You mean we cannot infer from the verses that his children were dead?
Yeah, I mean, where does it suggest? I mean, it doesn't suggest that they were dead and they were brought back to life.
Well, when he said, وَوَهَبْنَا لَهُ أَهْلَهُ,
Yes.
we gave him back his children, that would suggest that the children were taken away from him. And of course, you might say that children may be taken away in many different ways from a person. But of course, then we have to, about any story in the Quran, if we want to completely come to the verses without any reports and stories related to it, then we cannot understand really. Because as I said, usually these stories are told relying on some extra knowledge of the readers. And that extra knowledge comes from the riwayat. And the Prophet actually, and Ayyimah alayhimu salam, mentioned things around this story, because Quran doesn't want to go into details like Bible. Yeah.
Safraj, I think you wanted to add something.
Just as Zuhair is saying, perhaps the children didn't die. Maybe they rejected him the way the people rejected him, and in this way, and Allah then brought them back as He brought the people back. Perhaps.
No, nothing in the reports, no story like that has been mentioned. I mean, as I said, if you want, just say, I only look at the Quran, not anything related to the story, then you can really find very little in terms of what the story tells you. And you can go into many different versions that imagination can build. And I don't think we are allowed to do that.
Any sisters?
Sorry, maybe ahlihi means from his own mind, his own knowledge, his own belief. And other children come from his own sort of sources, rather than dead and come back. And isn't it just little knowledge is sufficient for a believer? Be returned back to him what he deserved and what he had. Isn't that enough for anyone to just say Allah can have this miracle and apply it in a life?
Oh, Ahl means family, of course. So, well, we have to really commit a sort of freehand explanation if we want to somehow expand the meaning of Ahl to anyone. So Ahl really means the family and family members. So when the Quran says وَوَهَبْنَا لَهُ أَهْلَهُ, we have to stick to the meaning which is understood from the terms used, and therefore it means family. We cannot really expand it that much. It would be a type of ta'wil for which there is no reason.
So Tafseer Quran by Quran, like Prophet Nuh's son, it was from his Ahl, wasn't it? But at the same time it wasn't. How could you adjust that one?
Yeah, because of course that is something which Quran explicitly mentions both, that he was from his Ahl, because Nuh says, Rabbi innabni min ahli. And then again the Quran says he was not from his Ahl. Ya Nuh innahu laysa min ahlak. We understand from this that for a prophet, of course, a person which goes astray, a son which goes astray, could not be regarded as his Ahl. But here, of course, Ayyub's son, they didn't go astray, they were very good children, and whether son or daughter, and therefore there is no question that they were not from his Ahl. They were from his Ahl, and Allah does not deny that. He just says we return his Ahl to him. Now, if we want to somehow argue about the verse because of Raj'ah, because we say, okay, it does not denote anything about Raj'ah and coming back from death, as I said, this is one of the verses used because of the story that envelops these verses, which goes with the verses. This is one of the verses used to mention that, yes, Raj'ah is possible, as in the case of Ayyub. But we have other verses which are much more explicit than this. As I said, the verse in Surah Baqarah, أَلَمْ تَرَ إِلَى الَّذِينَ خَرَجُوا مِنْ دِيَارِهِمْ وَهُمْ أُلُوفٌ حَذَرَ الْمَوْتِ فَقَالَ لَهُمُ اللَّهُ مُوتُوا ثُمَّ أَحْيَاهُمْ. Allah told them, die, and then He brought them back to life. And therefore, there are more explicit verses, but considering the story which goes with these verses, yes, of course, this could be one of those verses mentioned as a support for the idea of coming back after death.
Thank you very much, Sheikh.
Thank you.
Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And brothers, sisters, we will inshallah have the Tuesday session of Najul Balaga with Sheikh in Hujjat.